Well, hi everyone. Very, very excited to have you all on this webinar today. And whatever stage you're at when it comes to developing your professional personal brand, I do hope that this session will help you take it that step further. And really, my aim today is to give you more confidence, some tips, and hopefully a little bit of insight as well, so that you come out of this session with some realistic expectations or steps in terms of developing your professional personal brand in a compelling and authentic way. Quickly about me, just for some context, and also to explain the tulips on the page, which look quite dark, but they're there, orange tulips. They are my favorite flower, and I tend to try and sneak them in presentations just to give people a bit of an essence of me. So I'm Charlotte. I'm half Dutch, born in France, now a Londoner. And I've seen that everyone's dialing in from lots of different places today, which is really exciting. My professional background is in PR and communications. I work for a PR agency called Firefly. I've been there for almost 20 years now. Our company color is orange. I work with lots of different professionals and organizations in the tech sector to help them shape their reputations. So much of what I do day to day is about authentic storytelling. I tend to work with the leaders and the experts in an organization, but I'm also a firm believer that everyone in the organizations, all professionals in that organization, have influence on that company's reputation. So I definitely believe and feel it's worthwhile working on your personal professional brand for your company, but also actually it has a big impact on your career and development. So more on that specifically in just a minute. In terms of what I plan to cover today, I will be talking through why personal brand matters, what are the components of a personal brand, working on your areas of passion, the types of content that you can create, best practices for engaging others, and then how to boost your confidence. It's important to say at this point that a lot of what I'm going to talk about, a lot of the advice that I'm going to give today is about building your personal professional brand on LinkedIn very specifically, it being a big hub for professionals. But that said, there's some advice in here that is applicable to other networks, online, offline, in the real world, and not necessarily just networking. And some of this storytelling stuff's really good for, if you've got a presentation to do. So there's some advice here that's applicable for other situations as well. So I'm going to start by talking about the linked influencer. Why is this a trend and why is it on the increase? So much has happened since COVID, and so many people say this since COVID, this, that, and the other. But this really is, there was a turning point post-COVID, with LinkedIn. So much of what we were doing in real life moved online, and not everything went back offline. And the linked influencer was probably born before COVID, but really went on the rise during COVID, because that's, on LinkedIn is where all these professionals congregate and network. LinkedIn also has made big strides in moving away from being an online CV site and used heavily by sales to moving into a space where people want to be there to manage their online professional persona, hence the arrival of the linked influencer. And just as a definition for a linked influencer, it's defined as a professional who's mastered the art of creating engaging content on LinkedIn. There's aspects that you'll see with a linked influencer. I'm sure you've seen them in the wild, or you've seen the wannabes. There are aspects from sort of the consumer, more personal platforms, should I say, like Instagram and others, where the same things apply, but obviously this is a professional setting, so there's always a professional filter on how you do things on this platform. The people that work in tech and or work for tech organizations, or just are part of that tech space, there's such a huge community on LinkedIn, which is why so much of what I'm talking about today revolves around LinkedIn and doing this on LinkedIn. And in terms of sort of who to follow, who to track, I'm going to talk more about that just in some later slides. So in statistical terms, why is this worth your time? So much of it actually ties to career growth, which I mentioned earlier. And these are very significant numbers. So we've got, top one there, 71% of professionals believe that a strong personal brand needs to increase career opportunities. 85% believe that online networking is essential for career success. And then 78% of people on LinkedIn prefer insights from experts rather than the brand channels. So those top two, very high. Clearly, it does make a difference for career and development. That last one, just to draw attention to that, LinkedIn does prioritize posts and conversations between people and people. They, and generally speaking, people want to hear from people. However, there is a lot of people that do track brands and company pages. It's not at all irrelevant. So if you're involved in your company's LinkedIn profile, do not think for a minute that it's a waste of time. It's a really, really important one for visibility. And also remember, when you're engaging with those brand pages, there's a person behind those brand pages that really want to engage with you too. So, as much as LinkedIn will push the, post from and activity from people, the brand, the company page is still very important there. So what are the factors or the important factors of a personal brand? So got the 4 here on the slide. The first 2, I would say, is more the personal side of personal brand, and the second 2 are more brand side of personal brand. So people involved in marketing, those 2 words, value and visibility, very, very marketing speak. So from the top, authenticity, very important for many different reasons. Being authentic means you're communicating on aspects that are really relatable and that spark conversation. And also, we're humans. We can sense if something doesn't feel very real or very authentic. And, that can actually go against you. Consistency. This is a really important one for the online world, but also the LinkedIn algorithms will help with that visibility when they see that consistency in how you're behaving and how you're acting on the platform. Value, so funny word there in terms of your personal brand, but value is essentially what you're bringing to the table, and we all have something to bring to the table. We all have experiences, perceptions, areas of passion that makes us us. Everyone has value to bring, and I'll go into working that out in a slide in a minute, so don't fret if you're stuck and you're not sure what your value is. It's one of those things that's a work in process, and you can definitely work that out with this exercise that I'll pull up in a second. And then the last one's visibility. So this links very closely to consistency, because the more consistent you are, the more visible you become. Your visibility will build over time. So, but what you really need to think about with this particular point is, where do you want to build that visibility? In which communities? Is it within your sector? Is it within your, educational group? Maybe your uni alumni, maybe there's some good connections there, your peer community, or even in this particular group with GTA. Sometimes you might say all of that, which is great, but you might spread that visibility a bit thin. If you pick a few places, then you can really concentrate on sort of building up that visibility there. Right, this slide, oh my goodness, it's coming out so small on the screen. I don't know if you guys can really see this, but I had a lot of fun doing this slide, actually. This was essentially an example of how not to do storytelling on LinkedIn. Because the text is so small, I will read each one of these out just to make them make sense and just explain why they just haven't hit the mark. So the first example is essentially a discussion between the person and their 7-year-old child. So I'll just read it out. After dinner, my 7-year-old son walked in and asked, "Why are you working now? Aren't you the boss?" "Yes, I am," I replied, "but the boss works the hardest because he's working for everyone else." He looked confused. Think about your soccer coach. He doesn't play, and he spends lots of time coaching you, picking the team, making sure you're ready, and putting everyone in the best position so you can win. He started to nod. He has the most responsibility. You play for 20 minutes, but he works the whole week to make sure you're prepped and ready. More nodding. Well, being the boss is like being a coach. My job is to make sure everyone plays well and they're motivated and in a position to play their best. He thought for a moment and added, does that mean mum is the boss of our family? I think he got it. Now, why this doesn't work is because it just doesn't feel like it's a real conversation that happened. It could be that elements happened, but the way it's been reworked reads, it's just too, it just doesn't feel very authentic. It's good storytelling. It's just the content jars because people will just read that and not believe that that conversation happened with a 7-year-old. This next one in the middle, I'll read this out again. People told me I was too confident and that I should tone myself down. And guess where they're at today and where I'm at. Shrug shoulders emoji. Enough said, with a picture of this guy with his fancy clothes and his fancy car. Why this doesn't work is it doesn't really add any value, doesn't leave you feeling inspired. It just feels a bit showy offy, and so that wouldn't, well, I don't know about his audience, but I don't suspect that really hit the mark with them. And then this third example, I proposed to my girlfriend this weekend. Here's what it taught me about B2B sales. I just read that and think, my goodness, cringe. There are times where something personal can be talked about in a professional setting. I wouldn't say linking your engagement to B2B sales being one of them. It just doesn't feel right for this particular platform and for this particular audience. So as much as some of this on this slide is done very correctly, it's really the content that the people are sharing that isn't quite right. So how do you talk about something that you are genuinely passionate about and get that content right? Here's that exercise that I was talking about earlier. And I'd encourage you all now, if you've got your notepads, to quickly draw out this Venn diagram or take a screenshot and do this exercise and look at, start writing down, what do you love? What is it that you think the world needs? What do you get paid to do? And what are you good at? And you'll start noticing there's overlap there. And just for fun, please feel free to pop into the chat just some thoughts that you might have immediately when you see that Venn diagram, and how would you answer some of those questions? What do you love, or what do you think the world needs? Curious to see a few answers to those questions. Where it all overlaps, and especially in the middle, are the areas that really make you you. And you should feel very confident in amplifying that, or, those types of subjects in your personal brand. The connections aren't always there straight away, and they're not always obvious. For example, I love Marmite. I'm really good at eating it. But does the world need it? And do I get paid to eat it? No. But if Marmite did an exceptional PR campaign, so ticking that box of what I get paid for, talking about PR campaigns and comms campaigns, then I can talk about it in a really natural way. And I can talk about the love of the brand that I have in a really natural way. So it makes sense there to then start talking about a topic like Marmite. So sometimes, the connections won't appear immediately, but you'll see them over time. And also, I would say, keep this drawing somewhere safe. It's like a living and breathing exercise that will build over time. We all, moving through the world, have different experiences, and there'll be moments where we'll want to, that things that we love will change or, build. So keep doing this exercise on a regular basis. Okay, I'm moving on to the next section in this presentation, and it's all around storytelling. So At this point, you've got the topics that are right for you. So what do you do with them now? How do you bring them to life through stories and through conversation that you want to be having as part of your personal brand? So interestingly, those bad examples, like I said, had some good storytelling techniques there, but it was the content that wasn't quite right. You do need to have both to make it really powerful on, sites like LinkedIn, and to really sort of amplify your personal brand. So here's some few slides on some storytelling theory. So types of hook them in. Everyone has a short attention span. Everyone's scrolling and it's really, really hard, really noisy space online. So here's a couple of ways to stop someone from scrolling past something that you've worked hard to write, craft, or is something really powerful that you really want to get across and you don't want them to bypass it. There's some classic ones there with like starting with a question or a statement that stops someone in their tracks. You can pull out a quote that inspires you, or use imagery and video to have an impact. So, even though the content of what that guy was saying about his engagement, that picture was a great picture to add in there, even though the content wasn't quite right. It's definitely worth spending a little bit of time on this, especially if you're writing something that's really important to you, because it just can be too easy for people to scroll past, or it gets lost and buried in the ether that is LinkedIn or other online networks. So you've got your hook. How do you tell that story in a compelling way? Here's some narrative types, and I'm going to go through 8, so stay with me on this. Also, these couple of slides, actually, it's not just for online storytelling. You can use these narratives or use the structures for other things. So if you're doing a presentation, or there's another occasion where you're looking to tell a story, think about these narratives. These could be relevant to you. So let's start from the top. The monomyth. So this narrative is essentially the hero leaves your home, goes into the unknown, overcomes great trials, returns home with newfound wisdom. So think The Lion King or Star Wars. This is all about helping the audience understand how is it that you've come to the wisdom that you're sharing, and it kind of brings to life that messaging. So it's good for showing the benefits of risk, but then highlighting that transformative experience. Next, the mountain. So this is a good one for mapping tension and drama. Doesn't always have a happy ending. So think of nearly every TV show that you watch. Does have a big conclusion, does have a big cliffhanger. It's a good one for talking about series of challenges, but then reaching a certain point. The nested loops, that's a slightly more complicated narrative, but it's essentially multiple narratives around one principle in the middle. The first story is the last story you finish on. The second story is the second story that you finish on. So it's like telling it's like your friend telling you about a wise person in their life. So they start speaking, they talk about the wise person, the wise bit of information in the middle, finish with finish that story about what the wise person's saying, and then they finish their story to you. This is a good one if you're trying to tell a story about important lessons, and good one to talk about when you've been inspired and using an analogy or explaining a concept. Next one here is spark lines. So contrasting ordinary world with ideal world, what it is versus what it could be. So drawing attention to problems we have in our society, our lives, our businesses, is a really good one for fueling the desire to change in your audience or inspiring action. I saw a really good use of this narrative on LinkedIn recently, actually, when someone was very passionately explaining why the recruitment process was broken, and they had outlined several stages of the recruitment process where it wasn't quite right, and then what it really could be. So they used that spark lines narrative to tell that. So it wasn't a big moan post. It was actually a post where it really does very clearly highlight that there's some problems here that people need to get around, with some inspiration of like what it could be and how transformative it would be if we made those changes. Next, next 4. So in media res, so in the middle of things. So start in the heat of the action and then go back to the beginning. And it's a good way to get someone gripped, because, you know, you're starting with something big. But you don't want to start with something too big, because then you've given it all away and people won't, you know, listen to the rest of it. Just enough to get them hooked in. So this is quite good for kind of quite a short story, because you don't want to lose your audience's interest, and you also you want to get back to the action quite quickly. If anyone actually is watching Lost on Netflix at the moment, I know it's come back in the UK and some people are rewatching it or watching it. This is a really good example of that narrative where all these people, you know, have that plane crash on the island. And then for each character, they go back in time to explain, you know, a little bit more about that character and why they're doing things in the present. So except for they do it in a much more complicated way, because they do it for each character. But hopefully that makes sense to Lost fans in the room. If we've got any, please put it in the chat if you're a Lost fan. Converging ideas. So this is how different strands of thinking comes together to form one single idea. Very similar to the nested loops narrative, but you're framing one story with complementary stories, but that have a single conclusion. And it's good for showing how symbiotic relations have formed. So if you're a really good example of this is Google. So the two founders met before, did something before, went off on their separate ways, and then came back and formed Google. So if you if you're ever reading up about the founders of Google, this is the narrative that they use to tell that story. The false start is like you're telling a seemingly predictable story by but then disrupting it and starting all over again. So you're shocking the audience and then surprising them into paying attention or closer attention. It's a good one if you have failed something and you're forced to go back and reassess. And it's a good one for just disrupting the audience's expectations of what you're saying and keeping them engaged. And then the last one is the petal. So this one's good for organizing small stories around one central concept. So several interconnected stories that all lead back to one central concept. So they can overlap, these petals, and you know, have overlapping narratives, or they can be their own narrative in itself. Essentially, it's a good one for giving a really rich view on a central idea. And showing the interconnectedness of the stories and narratives around it. So that's it on the different narratives. So you've got your topic, you've decided how you're going to tell that story. What is then the format? So these are, you know, if you're on LinkedIn a lot, you will have seen them. And this is not an exhaustive list either. But these are great ways to format your content. You can have short posts, long posts, carousels, and they're really good for when you're, you know, looking at content on your phone. So they're really good for the mobile readers. Native video, and that tends to be really pushed by LinkedIn's algorithms. So if you decide to invest in LinkedIn, in native video, LinkedIn will thank you for it. Lots of use of imagery, and then there's obviously LinkedIn polls that are good for engagement. And I'd also say don't be afraid to use emojis where relevant. Emojis are used quite a lot on LinkedIn these days, not the same way as other, you know, platforms in your personal lives, but there are quite a few people that use them within their posts. These are a couple that I've seen a lot of. There's also the rocket ship, etc. So have a look and see if it makes sense for you to weave in an emoji from time to time. Here's a few statistics on the performance of these various bits of content. So posts that have shorter sentences, so under 12 words long, perform 20% better. So LinkedIn really likes succinct. Posts that are too promotional, if they sense that it feels very promotional, can have up to a 75% decrease in performance. So just be careful with the tone. of what you're saying. Relevant images boost the reach by between 15 and 20%, and even more so if you include a picture of yourself or a relevant selfie, it can go up to 30%. So really, it's worth the time and just checking and seeing if you tick all of those boxes in your post. It will really help you be a lot more visible. In terms of the kinds of posts that are very powerful on LinkedIn, this is just a selection of them. So highlighting a recent accomplishment or at the organization or of a colleague or of yourself, celebrating a career milestone, an anniversary, a promotion, a new hire, sharing your expert opinion, commenting on breaking news or something that's going on in the world, tying your post to an event. There's obviously a lot of buzz happening around a lot of events, and it's definitely worth using the right hashtags and things to be involved in that conversation. And then lastly, connecting the dots between workplace and personal story, but again, where relevant, and just be very mindful that it does work, not like that guy with the engagement and the B2B sales connection. LinkedIn is a really positive and supportive space, hence why these posts are the most powerful and that actually garner the most engagement. They're just so positive and about growth, pushing ourselves further or growing for ourselves. I would just be mindful of I wouldn't say be mindful of trolls on LinkedIn. There are not many trolls on LinkedIn. If you go to X, then definitely be mindful of trolls. But LinkedIn, it tends to be very positive, very supportive. You might have someone, if you go for something that's a little bit more controversial, you might have someone chime in with a thought. So thinking of either, the expert opinion example or, a workplace insight, you might get someone chiming in and saying something. Usually they're there because they want to give, share their perspective and be part of that conversation. If it turns into what feels like a negative discussion, take it off of like an open forum and try and do that directly with that person. That being said, like trolling, I just don't see happening so much on LinkedIn. If you get the sense that someone is just being negative to be negative, just don't engage with them. They're not worth it. There's a few of people like that around it. It's just not worth your time, and they're looking for a reaction. So just don't give them what they want. In terms of giving back and engaging with others, so remember with your personal brand, it's not just about broadcasting yourself and your views and your stories, but finding other moments to be visible and join the conversation and engage with others. And sometimes, that's sometimes very simple, and it's just a case of, a share, a congrats, and a comment, a like. But there's other ways you can sort of join that conversation, that space, and a lot of it is around who you follow and how, and therefore then who you engage with, or who you bring into your world. LinkedIn's algorithm's pretty good at surfacing people that are worth a follow. But you might stumble across people naturally. But then also do look at, who else is liking other people's posts. And it could be that you come across someone that's interesting and worth a follow. LinkedIn News is also a really good place to see someone that is vocal in your space or passionate about a similar topic that you're passionate about. So yeah, LinkedIn News is usually on the right-hand side of your homepage, and if you click through to a story, further down the stories there are people that are commenting or sharing their opinion on certain topics, and then it's as easy as clicking follow, and then they become, then they start to appear in your own feed. Tagging people and brands is also a really great way to bring people in and try and build that, build out your network and build the relationship with other people further. So and then going back to something I was saying earlier, do tag people's company pages or the company pages or the brand pages. People, like, often actually those people managing those pages are craving the engagement and are very likely to share the post or like the post, and that will increase your visibility. So tag people, absolutely, but think to tag the company that they're in, or, you know, the relevant companies to whatever it is that you're trying to say. Hashtags, absolutely use the hashtags. Worth doing a little bit of research. There is a sweet spot with hashtags where you don't want to go too broad, but you don't want to go too specific either. So hashtag technology, too broad. Hashtag women in technology, that's your sweet spot. Like hashtag women in technology in London, there's probably not many people using that hashtag. So you want to do just a little bit of research into good hashtags. And then the last one, including a question at the end, and you can even tag people and get their opinion. Obviously, be mindful of who you're tagging when you're asking a question, or, you know, curious, so-and-so, I'd love your thoughts on this too. Just make sure that if you do that, you're doing it with someone that you're pretty certain will answer the question or engage with you as well, or give them a heads up. Oh, I'm going to tag you because I'd love your views on this too. I hope that's okay. Right, how can AI help? AI can help a lot. LinkedIn has its own AI that will help you draft your posts. There's obviously as well lots of different tools, ChatGPT, Claude, that can also help draft a post. It's all about what kind of prompt you give these tools. The more specific the prompt, the better the output. So you can give these tools a direction on the style and tone by giving them posts that you've written before and saying, please match, you know, please write a post about this, but match the style and tone of these posts. Then it's more likely to sound like your voice. At its most basic, please just use these tools to proofread and check for grammar and typos, because they do that very, very well. And that is just such a quick click, and very, very easy to do. But let me just talk you through just a few examples here, in case, I'm sure many of you are probably doing this already, but in case you're not, here's some ways that I like to use these different tools. So I was working with Claude. I tend to find Claude better with words than ChatGPT sometimes. So I default to Claude, which is Anthropic's tool. But I asked it to write 150-word LinkedIn post about this webinar today. I gave it a few details. I gave it the title, who I was presenting to, what, you know, at the very high level, what I presented, and then just the goal of this webinar. It wrote a half decent post, I'd say. Like it's got the foundations of a decent post. It doesn't quite sound like me. I'd need to go through it and put it in my own voice, use my own words. But it's, you know, it's worked out a lot of things that I didn't necessarily tell it. So it said, we explored how to craft compelling narratives. That wasn't in my prompt. So it worked that out, which was great. Probably something to do with the, you know, knowing that it's around storytelling. But there's some things in here that I'd need to refine to make it more me. One thing I noticed with this, I was like, oh, it doesn't feel very compelling, or like if I was scrolling and I saw the first words, I had the pleasure of presenting a webinar, I'd probably scroll past it because it's just not very interesting. So going back to that storytelling element and hooks, I asked Claude, can I have a couple of examples to grab the attention of the reader? And this is what it came out with. And firstly, when I saw this, I was like, whoa, it looks almost like the slide that I wrote on compelling hooks, because it has got questions and statistics and telling bold statements, or, you know, using a quote to open things up. So it's got a lot of those examples there. It has actually, you know, based on the post, has written some examples. I actually don't like any of them, and I will be writing something completely different based on my actual experience from today. But it's, you know, the theory's there. It's giving me good pointers into what would work. And then the last thing I asked Claude was to critique the post by reading it as if they are a communications leader for a technology company, which is largely my network on LinkedIn. So I want to make it relevant for them. and I asked it, where is this strong and where could this be better? And this is the answer it gave me. And obviously it ticked those boxes: timeliness, community focus, value proposition, tick, 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 great. Areas of improvement: specificity, personal touch, and visual element, which is all very fair, and all things that when I was reading the post, I was like, oh yeah, it's not really going into the specifics of what I actually talked about, and it's not really my voice and feels like me, and it doesn't have that personality yet. So all very fair enough. Finding a visual element, I have no idea yet, but I can work that out later. But it's a good way if you've come up with something but you're like, I think it could be better, using these tools to critique. They can critique their own work, but they can critique something that you have written for yourself. So hopefully a lot of you guys are using these different tools already, but they're really great to aid you with different things on the personal, professional brand, journey. And I can see someone mention that Claude is very good at this. And yes, so we're all in agreement. Claude is very good with the writing things that are compelling. So what's next? Setting a goal for yourself. So I am sharing the blob swimming pool because this is a great way of visually thinking, like, where am I at the moment? What blob am I at the moment? And what blob do I want to be? So think of the pool as your like journey to building your personal professional brand. Where are you? Are you on the edge, looking in, feeling a little bit concerned still? Or are you on the edge, peering in, thinking this looks really interesting and I want to get involved? Are you going to be the blob that dives straight in? Or are you going to be the blob that walks in a bit more gradually? It's a good way to kind of visually think, what are my objectives here? And then you can, put this in the context of building a professional personal brand. Is it that you do one post, you set yourself a target of a post a week, or is it a post a month, or is it that you log in every single day, or do you log in 3 times a week and do some likes and comments and engage with the community? Do you want to be watching a little bit more before you start pushing out your own stories and your own content to people and building your brand? People's objectives will be completely different based on where they're at in their journey. So do have a think, have a look at the blobs. It's a good way of just working out where you are. And then lastly, just remember that you don't stop yourself from doing something because you fear it. And I can't stress enough, platforms like LinkedIn are very positive and supportive spaces. So if you're unsure but kind of earing towards like, yeah, I actually do, I do think I should do it, just go for it. And if it fails, it doesn't matter. I have in my time have put things out there that have had no engagement whatsoever and just done nothing. And that's almost the worst that can happen on LinkedIn. It's very, very rare that you'll get a very negative backlash. Like the worst is that it just doesn't go anywhere, and that's fine. Never mind, didn't work, move on, try something different. I think what's really important is to be really natural about it, and to back to that authenticity point. That's what's really, really important here. And then you can also pin all your best posts to your profile. So the ones that, when you have someone come onto your profile, they see, what you're all about, and it gives them a snapshot of things that, you are proud of, or that you are passionate about telling the wider world. So you can do that in the featured section of LinkedIn. And that is it